16 December marks mixed historical events in South Africa that date back to the early 1800s. First, it was a day where Zulu leader Dingani Senzengakhona Zulu battled it out with Piet Retief, resulting in the death of many in that time. This is also a day when the ANC Liberation Military Arm was born on 16 December 1961. Well, since the dawn of democracy, the day has turned into a reconciliation day for South Africans. So just how significant is this day given the past historical events associated with it under the new dispensation? Well, joining us now is ANC Stalwart Mavuso Msimang, ANC Stalwart. Babu Mavuso, thank you so much for your time and for joining me this afternoon. I understand the significance of the day, but I'd like us to start here. Just your reaction as an ANC Stalwart, as in fact a historical stalwart for this country, just your reaction on the decision by the ANC's Integrity Commission that ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule step aside.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here. The decision of the Integrity Commission is the most natural decision to be made in a case like that, because having listened to Ace Magashule, and they took into account the resolution of the Nasrec conference, which said that a person who is in Ace Magashule's position should step aside or step down. Sometimes they confuse these things. It's absolutely a correct decision.
All right, looking at today's significance in terms of where we are as South Africa, just from a reconciliation from 1994, or the path to reconciliation, as it were, to where we are 26 years later, where South Africans are saying they are actually more divided than ever, a lot of them being disillusioned. We've seen recent events in the last couple of weeks of that division, racist acts being displayed across various provinces. Just what is your take in terms of how far we have come as South Africa?
Well, one has to admit that although the government has tried to stimulate us towards come up with programs that promote social cohesion, that has not been achieved, most unfortunately, and the indicators are there for all to see. I mean, South Africa is the most unequal country. You've got gender-based violence, you've got violence generally. The economic status of the people is very different. Race incidents spring up so often. It's clear these are not exceptions. These are things that are really happening with a high frequency. So it is, frankly, quite disappointing that that's where we are. It's not an easy thing to achieve as long as we have got unequal societies like ours to achieve social cohesion. So no, we don't have it. I think we must try harder to achieve that, because we're not going to go very far as a nation, and no one will benefit from this kind of inequality from the lack of cohesion.
And then the question obviously remains, whose job is it to make sure that that cohesion is guaranteed and is a lived experience? I mean, if you look at just the definition of racism, if you ask one South African, they'll have a different answer to the next South African. Inequality doesn't mean the same thing for one person. What is needed? And who must actually be at the forefront and at the helm of that fight to ensure that South Africa does what it was meant to do in 1994?
Well, everybody has a huge responsibility to do this. Others have got more, would have more effect. Let me just say, I think the government has a lot of work to do in this regard as it manages policies. I think we should try and think about what causes the lack of cohesion. Why is it missing? Why do we have, as long as you have poverty in the midst of riches, as long as you have what I referred to earlier as the inequality These are elements that are controllable by government through the policies, economic development policies, socio-economic policies that it develops that influence this. Even socially, education is so much in a palace state, public education. So there is a huge role that the government, through the maintenance of its, through the development of the correct policies, would play in this thing. But the private sector has a lot of work, of responsibility in this regard too. I mean, you hear sometimes about the gender inequality in salaries, that you could have male and a female with similar qualifications. In some instances anyway, you still have unequal pay. That does not bode well for equality. And I think in very many other respects, employment policies that are carried out by the private sector, I don't have a specific instance to cite right now, but as long as you have inequality, as long as you have differential salaries for people with similar qualifications, you are going to have this problem. So in summary, I would say government definitely has a big role by pursuing the correct policies that promote among the races and among the people. We are suffering here we're experiencing both a race issue as well as a class issue. You and I think you'll agree, are much better off than many of our folks who look like us. And so there is a class distinction between the two of us, and that again is a contributor to social inequality. I'm not saying everybody must be paid the same salaries, but we clearly are in the middle class by and large, and have left a lot of people in stark difficulties in the working environment.
But Mavuso, I totally agree with you in terms of government being at the forefront. But I'd also say and add that your party, the ANC, is also at the helm and at the forefront of government, and that a lot of people are looking at it now and looking at some of the issues that have been playing out over the past couple of days, and saying how much of your party, the ANC, has galvanized the people of South Africa in the fight against inequality, in the fight against racism. Do you think that the ANC is doing a good job?
Well, one is seeing some tendencies where the ANC, which was always, it says from the Freedom Charter days, it had a clear policy of every South African belongs here, all who live in it belong here and must be subjected to similar treatment. I can say you are seeing fewer not Black people join the ANC. That is an indication that there is a failure of policy to attract South Africans of all races. That's a shortcoming there. And you do hear also our people talking about, while it is true that the Africans were the most oppressed and therefore deserve the government's attention in addressing those things, the fact of the matter is that we should, in my opinion, start moving away from the race classification of poverty and look at who are poor using certain criteria, very objective criteria. But generally, I think we tend to be becoming fairly chauvinistic, and I'm not really happy that South Africans accept us as a non-racist organization. We say so, but we don't always act like that. I agree with you.
Just final question from me before I let you go. Now, we've seen in recent days also just women and young children being at the forefront and at the brunt of gender-based violence. Just your reaction on how bad the situation is in South Africa, and if we are actually making a concerted effort to address gender-based violence, in your opinion?
Well, some people have branded the gender-based violence a pandemic. And violence generally in South Africa is very rife. So absolutely, there is no doubt that this is a crisis that we need to manage and manage properly. The government makes good pronouncements. I think society as a whole really needs to respond to this crisis. We can't always look to government for action. But if there is any area in which the government contributes by condoning, let's say, gender-based violence or not putting in place policies and strategies that would assist, then you could perhaps blame us. But I really think we have a big problem here, and it requires everybody to put shoulders to the wheel, in order to resolve it.
All right, Mavuso, thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure to speak to you. ANC Stalwart Mavuso Msimang speaking to us.